The design of nearly all modern-day aircraft is considered to be based on the Wright brothers' original flyer. However, many people don't realize that the Wright brothers are not truly the first in flight. While it is true that they did conduct the first controlled and sustained flight, there were many engineers before them that created early forms of gliders, airplanes, and even helicopters that did have flying capability. Perhaps the first of these engineers dating back to even the 9th century BC. Bladud was the 10th ruler of the House of Brutus, a royal family of the early Celtic people that later inhabited Great Britain. Early in his life, his father sent him to Athens to study liberal arts, but he contracted leprosy and returned home only to be imprisoned. However, after he escaped, he became a pig farmer in the small village of Swainswick. Here he saw how the pigs would return home from the nearby wilderness covered in mud and noticed how they would seem to be immune to many skin diseases. One day he found where the pigs have been bathing in this mud and decided to do so himself. Upon bathing in the mud, he discovered he was cured of his leprosy and decided to return home. He then became the heir to the throne once again and founded the city of Servedon in hopes that others would be cured like he was. He then began to study the arts of necromancy, in which the legend is said that he crafted himself a pair of wings and attempted to fly from London to New Troy. Unfortunately, he was killed when he hit a wall and broke his neck along the way. Later in the 5th century, a Greek mathematician and philosopher by the name of Archytas invented the flying pigeon. Archytas was perhaps the first engineer to study the way birds fly in the history of aerospace. His design had a cylindrical body with a pair of wings attached to the mid-side of the construct, as well as another pair on the end like a bird's tail. The design also had a pointed tip and an airtight interior, with the only opening being near the tail wings. It was mounted on a boiler, and the steam from the boiler caused the pressure to build inside the hollow interior until the force of the steam caused it to shoot off the mount like a rocket. It's also believed that the flying pigeon may have been attached to a wire as guidance. However, it was said to have flown hundreds of meters before crashing, and was one of the first flying machines to use a form of jet propulsion. Another interesting step in the evolution of aerospace is the invention of kites due to their ability to fly very high while still being controlled by someone on the ground. Although it's not truly identified who first invented the kite, the earliest accounts of them points towards their origins being in China in the 3rd century BC, in which they were used for both traditional and militaristic applications. The earliest kites were made of silk and bamboo, but were later redesigned using cowskin instead. The kites were rectangular in shape with pieces of cloth and string attached to the sides to keep the kite stable in the air. The Chinese painted designs such as cranes or dragonflies on the kites to symbolize good fortune, and even flew them during funeral ceremonies in hopes of sending messages to their fallen ancestors. However, many military generals, such as the one in the Ming Dynasty, quickly adapted this technology by attaching bamboo flutes to the sides of the kites to scare enemies away in combat, or by attaching dynamite to the kites and using them to attack enemy territories. There are even accounts of kites being designed to carry people high up into the atmosphere for reconnaissance during the battles between dynasties. But as other civilizations developed around the world, the kite became obsolete, and the shift of heavier-than-air travel became more focused on balloons, gliders, and earlier airplanes. Perhaps one of the most influential and notorious inventors of early flight came to be in the 15th century CE, when Italian artist and inventor Leonardo da Vinci began dreaming of a time when humans would soar through the air like birds. Da Vinci became very interested in flight patterns of the bat in particular, and believed a mechanism could be constructed to mimic the movement of a bat to be able to fly. Many of Da Vinci's designs were vividly recorded in an early version of an engineering notebook, but mostly remained theory and were not built and tested in his lifetime. Many of his works were considered to be extremely advanced for such an early era, one of these being his design for an ornithopter, a device with flapping wings powered by movement. His drawings demonstrate how the device was to be strapped around the torso, and the arms and legs were used to move the wings in a flapping motion. Another one of his inventions was called the aerial screw, and resembles that of a modern-day helicopter. The main problem with the design was that it was just too heavy. The original design had a circular base with a wooden pole leading up the aerial screw, which would then provide it lift when the center is turned. The idea of providing lift with these spiraling blades was adopted into the use of modern-day helicopters and even simple airplane propellers. However, the influence of Da Vinci in aerospace engineering could only be matched by the achievements of Sir George Cayley. George Cayley is said to be the father of aerospace engineering as a whole. He was born on December 27, 1773, in Great Britain, and only 26 years later developed the idea of the airplane being a vehicle with fixed wings, therefore disagreeing with Da Vinci's plans to create an ornithopter. He also identified the independent systems to any flying machine as being control, lift, and propulsion. Other than these ideas, he also invented the four basic forces that act on any flying machine as thrust, weight, lift, and drag. He used these concepts to build what many people believe to be the first successful unmanned glider in the history of aerospace. As well as founding both the University of Westminster and the British Association for the Advancement of Science, he also invented the idea of having cambered wings on an aircraft. This idea meant that the wings were not symmetrical, which would increase the maximum lift coefficient and increase the efficiency of the aircraft itself. In this idea, it was also utilized in the creation of the Wright brothers' flyer, and Cayley was even credited by the Wright brothers themselves for his discovery. Besides his inventions in aviation in specific, he also invented a prototype of the modern-day internal combustion engine. However, his design was fueled by gunpowder, unlike today's gasoline-powered engines. He did believe that a more efficient engine could be built using vapors of highly flammable gas. However, the discovery of gasoline has not yet taken place. Upon the discovery of his combustion engine, he thought of incorporating it into his design, but discovered that the engine was much too heavy to be placed on a flying machine. Much of Cayley's focus was on keeping the design lightweight and aerodynamic, in which he stated that the powered craft would be very difficult without a much lighter engine. This line of thinking eventually led to Cayley's successful glider. His glider consisted of a base cabin much like a small rectangular wagon, with an early form of landing gear mounted to the sides. The main wing was a large kite-shaped surface inclined to increase lift. The main wing had a tail attached to its back for stability, and the back of the cockpit had a manually controlled rudder connected to the back for steering. The pilot of this 5-foot-long glider was a 10-year-old boy. However, he later designed a triplane glider much like his last attempt, except this glider flew more than 900 feet before crashing. The man who flew this glider 50 years before the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk was the first human adult said to have successfully flown the glider invented by George Cayley. But this is only a sample of the most prominent engineers in early aerospace. There are hundreds of scientists and explorers who desired to sail across the sky with the birds, and there are hundreds of attempts by these same people to do so. Whether 10 feet or 100, there are many engineers who, through hard work, experimentation, and redesign, did invent ancient flying machines in which we owe all of our progress in aviation.